Hello, my dears. I don't know how to intro this video. Also, my lighting is really wonky, but we're rolling with it. Today, we're going to talk about dysautonomia and POTS. It's going to be a really great time. My computer brightness is so bright. Oh my goodness. Now, I tend to stray away from explain my diagnosis videos because then when researching them, I start to convince myself that maybe I'm just faking it and I don't actually have the diagnosis and I've been lying the whole time, especially because I had to fight doctors for my diagnosis, so maybe I'm just really persuasive and I'm an imposter. But we're here. And we're doing it, and this is good, and we're going to give ourselves the grace to say that while in the chronic illness world, we tend to find that doctors rarely know what they're doing. I would not have gotten this diagnosis had I been faking it, because it's really hard to get specialists to give diagnoses in the first place. And I'm saying all of this because yes, as somebody who makes their whole life and career somewhat centered around disability, I still struggle with imposter syndrome, that maybe I'm not actually disabled and I'm just lazy or out of shape or overdramatic or something, which I think is an important thing to share, you know? Anywho, if you don't know who I am, hi, my name is Sydney. My pronouns are they, them. I do a lot of things around disability and media and arts in the world. I also talk about those things online. I have upwards of 35 diagnoses at this point. I know how to cope with things, I know how to handle life, and I don't know what thing to attribute to what thing, so I find it entertaining to just collect them. Nobody knows what to do with me, including doctors. Nobody knows what's wrong with me. I think it's hilarious, and I'm just vibing. If you want to know a general list of some of those diagnoses, though, you can check out a nice little video I made going over them up here. But today we're going to talk more in depth about two disorders, which in my brain are the same thing, but apparently they're not. Also, I'm a white young person with shoulder-length light brown curly hair. I'm wearing a dark gray 3/4 sleeve shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf. All right, cool. So let's start with what a dysautonomic disorder is. Basically, dysautonomia? Hold up, we're gonna Google this because I looked it up and then I already forgot it. I don't say these words out loud very often. I usually just say POTS.
Dysautonomia.
It's dysautonomia. Great, let's start with what a dysautonomic disorder is. Basically, dysautonomia is a disorder where the autonomic nervous system, or the ANS, does not function as it's typically supposed to. The ANS is in charge of controlling all the bodily functions that typically humans don't need to think about doing, such as breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, internal and skin temperature, sexual arousal and function, kidney function, bladder function, pupil dilation, and lots of other things. It also controls the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. If you have not been to therapy for anxiety, first of all, congratulations. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight one, and the parasympathetic nervous system is the rest and digest one. People with anxiety tend to be taught that their sympathetic nervous system is overactivated and that they need to control it. So yeah, the autonomic nervous system is kind of really important. Dysautonomia is relatively common in that it affects more than 70 million people worldwide. Personally, numbers like that don't hold any meaning to my brain, but I'm saying it out loud because it sounds nice. It can be present at birth, it can appear gradually over time, or it can be suddenly onset at any age, often as a result of illness. It affects men and women equally. No, we're not going to talk about the disaster of the gender binary and how that analysis is pointless anyway. Whatever. There are two categories of dysautonomia. Primary dysautonomia, aka your nervous system is funky, and that's it. It's just a funky time. Or secondary dysautonomia, which means that your nervous system is funky in association with something else, such as diabetes, Parkinson's, lupus, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, celiac, EDS, HIV, Lyme disease, POTS, dementia, long COVID, and many autoimmune disorders. And also probably other things. Those are just all the ones that I've seen listed in various places. Common symptoms include orthostatic intolerance, which means that a person can't stand up for long periods of time without feeling faint or dizzy, noise and light sensitivity, ongoing tiredness, shortness of breath, vertigo, unexplained panic attacks, vision issues such as tunnel vision, blackouts, blurry vision or visual fog, issues with temperature regulation, changes in sweat, either being a very sweaty human or having your body forget how to sweat for a while, which sometimes happens to me and it's weird, shaking or muscle tremors, wacky blood pressure, nausea as a result of that wacky blood pressure, brain fog, forgetfulness, heart palpitation, sleeping problems, frequent urination, exercise intolerance, dehydration, migraine and headaches, and fainting or loss of consciousness. So that's dysautonomia as a category. Then there are dysautonomic disorders. They're basically just subtypes of dysautonomia, more specific ways to describe things. And there are 15 of them. We're not going to go through all 15. Today we're going to talk about the one that I have, and it is called POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. This is one of the most common dysautonomic disorders, and it happens predominantly in women. which gender, anyway. But that is why, despite there being over 500,000 people in the US alone who experience POTS, research is few and far between. Much like we've also seen with migraine research, sexism in the business is great. Now, many people diagnosed with POTS find that it gradually will disappear over time, but usually if POTS is developed in regards to a separate condition, it does tend to be lifelong. But like any chronic illness, it definitely ebbs and it flows, and also you kind of get used to it over time, or at least like I have. We're gonna talk about my experience in a bit. Now, POTS is categorized by an abnormally large increase in heart rate and therefore drop in blood pressure upon standing. So when a typical human stands up, their heart rate increases a teeny tiny bit to get a little bit more blood flow so you can stay upright when you stand. When I stand up, my heart rate spikes and my blood pressure drops and all the blood goes to my feet and smack down to the floor I go. I will say that I have not fully passed out in a few years because I am ready for that, and I always catch myself on stuff, and I'm quite proud of that skill. But little me totally flopped to the floor regularly. It was a thing, we rolled with it. In general, the experience of POTS is mostly circulation stuff, so it's the standing up, passing out situation is like the characteristic, whatever. But then also poor circulation in general. My fingers and toes tend to, and my feet also, and hands, my appendages tend to just turn purple or gray, just for fun, just whenever they're feeling like they want to do that. Also heart palpitations, and chest pain, and dizziness or lightheadedness, shortness of breath, migraines and headaches, tiredness and weakness, brain fog, shakiness, weird vision things like tunnel vision and foggy vision and all those things, and digestive problems, which include nausea. It can also result in frequent panic attacks because my heart will decide for no reason to do a heart situation, and my body goes, oh, we must be having a panic attack now. That's the only explanation for what's happening. We'll do the rest of the panic attack things then. And then I just have a panic attack with absolutely no trigger other than my body being bored. It's also very common for people to be diagnosed with IBS, chronic migraines, and anxiety rather than POTS, POTS is usually typically the root cause of all of those things. Many people with POTS will also find that symptoms get way worse in response to emotional stress, physical stress, or menstruation, which is all the time. But there is a correlation there, for sure, definitely. When things get worse on one end, they get worse on the other end. Again, POTS ebbs and flows like any chronic illness. Also, you do get used to it and you learn how to manage it on some level and whatnot. We're gonna get into that shortly. But first, let's talk about the connections to autism, because there are many. The first is that one of the most common comorbid diagnoses with POTS is EDS, or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. That's a hypermobile connective tissue disorder. This makes logical sense to me because I would assume that stretchy connective tissue, like muscles and skin, would probably somehow connect itself to making maybe blood harder to hold on to, or other signals getting mixed up or something. I explained that in the least convincing way possible. But anyway, there's a massive overlap between EDS and autism, to the point where most autistic people I know have some sort of hypermobility, including myself, and I think that every person with EDS that I know is autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. If you want to learn about hypermobility, I have a video about that up here. I'm tripping over my words today. You know what? That's representation. Now, obviously, all of the people I know are in a very strange, hyper-specific subset of people, so my sample may not be the best or most accurate, but there is a very large overlap there as far as I can tell. And also research backs up what I'm saying. This isn't just random. There's also a huge comorbidity of IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome, in POTS because the autonomic nervous system controls digestion. Autistic people are 67% more likely to have IBS than the general population. So again, we have quite the overlap there. And then we also need to acknowledge the fact that autistic people tend to have interoception issues, aka we struggle to be able to name what we are feeling or what is going on in our bodies, often because our bodies just don't send us those signals, or they do and we don't know how to read them. This is why we can accidentally go 16 hours without eating or going to the bathroom. But again, if dysautonomic disorders are the autonomic nervous system not doing its job too well, particularly the aspect of its ability to communicate and regulate things, it would make sense that this is connected to how autistic people function. Like, we may struggle with interoception partially because our interoception systems aren't fully working as they typically should. Not to mention that a lot of POTS symptoms can be activated or worsened by an overworking sympathetic nervous system, which, given the trauma of being an autistic person in a non-autistic world and the general sensory overload and social overload of it all, we often exist with lots of anxiety and heightened sympathetic nervous system, so this connection again makes sense because there would be on some level some sort of not causal relationship, but definitely like a an overlap of one thing worsening the other experience. There is new and increasing research into the overlaps between dysautonomic disorders and autism. The reason that this is new is because these are some of the most underdiagnosed physical disorders because people refuse to believe that you have them and instead tell you that you're faking or being overdramatic. And we know the universe's track record for listening to autistic people, particularly autistic kids, is not great. Anyway, let's talk about my experience and how I manage POTS. Now, I can't remember a lot of my growing up because I have memory loss, but I seem to remember having these issues always existing when I was younger, and I was always accused of being lazy, for not being super active all the time, and for having accidents when I was way too old to be having accidents. Around middle school, when I started having frequent growth spurts, I started to experience symptoms more acutely because my circulation couldn't keep up with the growing, and so I got dizzy a lot and I had a lot of pain, and I started to experience chronic migraines. This is when random cramping in my body also started pretty regularly, and I learned not to stand up too fast or my head would hurt for the rest of the day. Also, my heart rate would randomly spike kind of weird every now and then. I called it thumpy times, and I never told anybody about it because every time I would mention being in pain or something, people would just be like, oh, it's part of growing. You'll get better. Don't worry about it. So in my brain, I was just like, I'm having a minor cardiac event. It's fine. And then just kept on moving and didn't tell anybody. But this was also the time period that I started semi-professionally singing in a children's choir, which meant hours upon hours of standing still with hot lights on you and using a lot of breath support and air. That was an issue. And in 6th grade, I passed out during my first concert, which is awful. But it didn't become a noticeable enough problem until I was in high school for some reason. And that will never make sense to me. But that's when I started having panic attacks that I promise you were started because my heart did wacky things. It had nothing to do with my emotional state. But then I was convinced it was my emotional state. Anywho, that was also when I started having fairly constant migraines and I would just pass out regularly. So I started going to specialists, one of which said that my passing out regularly made sense because teenage girls who are singers experience this a lot. It's called vasovagal syncope, and I would just grow out of it. Or if I didn't, then it's POTS, and then I would just figure it out. He also apparently diagnosed me with chronic fatigue syndrome at the time, but then forgot to tell me. And he did tell me that I couldn't be dizzy when I said I was dizzy because my pupils did not show signs of dizziness, and therefore the whole thing was just anxiety and I was making it up for attention, and he sent me to a psychiatrist. So that was great. I later did the tilt table test with a different doctor and discovered that I do in fact have POTS, and my dizziness was in fact real dizziness, some of which is caused by my pupils occasionally forgetting to not repeatedly dilate and constrict over and over and over again. So that's weird. It doesn't happen as much anymore as it used to, but sometimes people would like hang out with me and be like, Sydney, what are your eyes doing? And I'd be like, something. They're sure are doing something. But I was told throughout this whole process that I did need to control my anxiety before we could try any other treatment, which looking back, yeah, my anxiety was a mess. But again, so many of these panic attacks were kind of cardiac based and not actually anxiety based. And so when we treated the other thing, I started to get anxious about things happening that were happening because of the disability, not the other way around. Anywho, I ended up getting kind of used to it over time. I learned that my knuckles turn purple right before I pass out. I learned that I need to eat a lot more salt every day to help with my blood pressure. I go through so many tortilla chips. Okay, here's a fun fact about me. Every time I go to the grocery store, will try I did this for like a year and a half, every time I went, every other week, would buy a different brand of tortilla chips. I have tried every single brand of tortilla chips that exist that I can find, and I have a preferred brand. I was about to be like, I'll show you. I'm not going to do that. But if you want to know what the best texture to salt ratio is for tortilla chips, let me know. Anywho, I also learned that I need to eat food every 3 or so hours to even out my blood sugar so I don't pass out. I learned to not be afraid to take breaks when I need them. I learned to dress in layers so I can accommodate my body temperature being a royal disaster, and I often will have fans on at the weirdest times, but they're also super helpful. I own like 3 fans in this teeny tiny dorm room alone. I love fans. They're wonderful. I also started hydrating a lot more, which helped a ton. I went through like 3 or 4 liters of water a day in high school. And through vocal training, I also learned how to better use my air so I don't get short of breath and therefore dizzy as much as I used to, because I can manually force myself to breathe how one normally should in certain situations because my body does not automatically adjust. It definitely is a lot more difficult with masks on, so I feel like I've had a harder time since then. Haven't totally navigated that, but I am trying my best. I also got really used to just laying on the floor. Just like with POTS, you do a lot of laying on the floor. Like, my body tells me to lay on the floor to fix the circulation thing, and that's just what I do. I, in fact, love laying on the floor. Floors are wonderful. If you don't do that, I recommend starting. It's great. And when I am laying down, I will also do some stretches or otherwise things to get blood flow going before I get up to prevent undesired accidental floor time. I'm also a lot more careful with making sure I get enough sleep, which I like to say I'm good at, but it's really hit or miss. I wake up consistently the same time every day. So that's solid, but my bedtime is real sketchy. But what's interesting is because I forgot that I had POTS almost immediately after I was diagnosed, and also nobody else in my life bothered to remind me, I didn't actually purposefully do any of the direct POTS care options. I just figured them out on my own based on what would logically make my head hurt less through trial and error, and a lot of error. And then I accidentally stumbled upon what doctors recommend. So I feel like I've been successful accidentally. But something that I did deliberately want to talk about here that I did not follow back then is exercise. POTS often involves exercise intolerance. And I grew up fairly exercise intolerant. My blood pressure drops too quickly. I get out of breath too quickly. I hit the ground hard. It's my thing. But if you've seen any footage from the show I'm currently working on, you may notice a whole lot of plopping on the floor or like laying completely down flat to straight up vertical and running with no switch time in between there. I don't know what footage my team is putting up, so maybe you haven't seen that and this makes no sense to you, but whatever, that is what's happening in the show. And I'm directing the show, so I've told myself to do that. That kind of motion is obviously one of the worst things you can do with POTS. I am a bad example, but I was careful about it. I knew that that was my goal because that's what this role requires. Yes, I could have changed it to be more accessible, but I didn't want to. I like a good challenge, and I built up to it for many, many months. You may remember a video of mine from a while back about how to excessively exercise. I didn't research POTS exercise for that one, but I honestly kind of followed the pattern anyway. Based on research, exercise therapy for POTS tends to be very slow and graded, starting with low impact muscle building and then slowly working its way up. Some people will never get to the full cardio, and some people are able to run 5Ks, and all of that is totally okay and reasonable. I'll be the first to tell you that part of why I can physically do the things that I do is because when I was in conservatory abroad, I got yelled at if I didn't do all of the things everybody else was doing, which is a lot of ground to standing, ground to standing, ground to standing. So I have learned how to continue walking as normal when my vision is completely blacked out and make that look normal. I don't think that was safe. I don't recommend conditioning your body to do those things with brute force. Please don't do that to yourself. But definitely in my experience, a lot of getting me to where I am now was, other than that, slow, careful building of tolerance and being accepting of how long it took or how difficult it was and having that be okay. I can confidently say that my introduction of safe exercise in my life has made me feel so much better. Though I will also say that there's this idea that exercise is going to cure your disability, and that is not the case, and that does not happen. And if you don't exercise, you don't have to at all. Literally no pressure to do that, because I spent so many years of people telling me that if I just started doing like yoga or if I started doing cardio, it would fix my disability and I would suddenly be fine. And I'm not saying that at all because that's so freaking frustrating to hear. I'm just saying that if exercise is something that you like doing, something that brings you joy, that you want to be able to do, that frustrates you that you can't do it, there are safe ways to build up that tolerance so you can do that. Definitely look into it. There's also physical therapists who specialize in that. So just do some research and you should find some local things for you, hopefully. I hope that's helpful. The other big thing that turned a lot around for me is as a result of the whole brain damage situation, I had to go onto the FODMAP diet, which is a specialized restriction diet for people with IBS that helps heal the bowels, and then you can start to add things back in. In doing so, I discovered a lot of things I have been actively allergic to my whole life that I no longer eat. And my body feels so much better now that I can actually digest food without massive roadblocks in the way. I'm so much less exhausted and dizzy than I used to be. And I think that also part of that has to do with the fact that I have coping skills and I've stopped growing, but also definitely not having daily minor allergic reactions has been a life changer, particularly because my body is now getting more nutrition from the food I'm putting into it as well, which helps so much with random dizziness and shakiness. Hashtag not medical advice. I'm not a doctor, just sharing my experience. Also, other resources I read said that alcohol consumption can drastically worsen POTS symptoms. I'm unable to digest alcohol, so I'm not going to test that one for you. But if you have that lived experience, do let me know in the comments. Maybe that information will be helpful for somebody else. There are also medications that can help with certain symptoms of POTS. I was never given those because people were vaguely convinced I was faking it for attention, but they do exist. I also have heard both very positive and very negative things about compression clothing. I will say that I love compression clothing. My back brace functions as a compression garment and has also been life-changing for me in the sense of regulating my body for a lot of reasons. I have a video about that up here. But other than those things, I still exist pretty much by trial and error. My body temperature is a disaster. I can go from not needing to pee for like 5 hours straight to needing to go 3 times in a half an hour. Or I will pee, I will get up, I will walk out of the bathroom, and then I will immediately have to pee again and I will go back in. I don't know why, and I know that's a dysautonomic situation. I got nothing. I also will still regularly, voluntarily consume things I cannot eat, which I immediately regret. I still spend a lot of time existing on the floor, wondering when I will be able to feel my feet again. But overall, it ebbs and it flows just like any other chronic illness of mine, and I've learned how to work it into the interesting little life that is my own. So I guess if I were to impart any advice here, it's that the worst part of having any dysautonomic disorder, but also any chronic illness or any fluctuating disability in general, is the feeling of a loss of control. So figure out where you can get some control. It will never be full control, but a step is a step, and it takes time. Truly, it took years of migraine diaries and note-taking and logs and all of these things to try to figure out what sort of weird little lifestyle made me feel physically the best and made me able to at least sometimes do the things that I want to do. The biggest step is learning to notice patterns and to listen to what your body needs, and also learning to be okay with taking breaks and with being the weird kid who's laying on the floor over there, and learning to trust that you know your body better than anybody else does. These are skills that come with time, but if I was able to figure that out, I am very sure that anybody else can figure that out, because I don't know what I was doing at all whatsoever. I was just a 13-year-old with a notebook who was told they were too anxious and needed to deal with that, and just pretending that heart palpitations were completely normal. Like, truly anything you can do will be better than that. I promise. Anywho, I'm gonna leave this one here, but I hope that it was helpful or interesting on some level. I've linked some stuff about this in the description for you if you want to learn more. POTS and other dysautonomic disorders seem to be a common part of long COVID, as research is showing. So a lot of people are navigating this right now. So to all of you beginning this journey, I'm sending my love and good energy, and I promise it's all gonna be okay. It will be. And with that, thank you for listening. Thanks for learning. Remember, it's never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.